This is day 2 of the April 94 7-day retreat in Springwater. These were the 3 main topics that I jotted down from group and individual meetings, some of them repeating themselves. What do you mean by identification? I hear you use that word. In a certain sense, I don't know what attribute was used, pejorative or negative, dangerous. I have used it differently all my life. To me, identification meant to suffer with someone, compassion, identifying with this person's fate and feeling it. Suffering together. So we'll look closely at what we mean when we use the word identification, because it is very clear that unless you and I use the same meaning for the same word, we will not be in communication with each other. And different words have various meanings. So I'm glad it was brought up so we can clarify this, and in the clarification maybe look deeper. In this connection, what does suffering mean? Became of concern to people in the group, thinking of someone who's suffering and feeling gripped by that pain, being entangled in it, gripped, like a person said, like an animal grabbing me. The suffering of someone else coming up in memory, in the imagination. So it would be good to look at what do we mean when we talk about suffering. Sometimes it is said that the Buddhist or the Buddha's message was all life is suffering. Another translation says all life is sorrow or pain. So is there, for our understanding, can we make a differentiation between pain, experiencing pain, and suffering pain? And does any kind of clarification of this kind help to see things clearer in ourselves and each other? The third question revolved around effort and effortlessness. Someone saying, when you talk in the sitting room about listening and there are the birds singing, twittering, the coughing, breathing, one's own breathing, maybe audible breathing by others. The internal sensations of an alive body, in touch with other surfaces, in touch with itself if the hands are touching each other or the thigh, the sensations, the awareness of all of that. The person said when it happens in the sitting room, many people sitting quietly and one person pointing it out, it's rather effortless. But then the assumption is made that it has to be effortless all the time, or was effortless all the time before, and it is not. considerable effort goes into this work of attending. And I'd like to look closer together with each other now and in group and individual meetings, if it is of interest. What does it mean to make an effort to be attentive? The effort of attention and the effortlessness of attention. Coming back to the first, to the identifying, I looked it up again as I did once before in the dictionary and found the 3 different meanings for to identify with something. The first meaning is to feel with someone else as though it was oneself. This is what the person brought up. I'm identified with her sickness or with someone's loss. I'm identified with the people in Bosnia, their suffering, their fear and anxiety and uncertainty and lack of food. And so I identify with that, meaning put myself into that situation and suffer with it, feeling the same feelings, or at least thinking one feels the same feelings, because it's never quite the same as if one is directly in a situation that's different than imagining it. But the meaning of identifying is that, to feel other people's feeling, think other people's thoughts, and experience the same. And the compassion of that, or the empathy was the word used. Another meaning of identifying is to identify the birds that had breakfast this morning while we did. They were blue jays. Easy to identify. One of the few that I can identify. It's amazing too, when they feed, the others stay away. They must be very bossy in their own way. Or is that already a projection? At any rate, when they're there, the others keep a distance most of the time. And they're identified by their looks, their color, their size, their call. And of course, we're identified all the time in our identity cards, ID cards, and our passports. We travel. Have to have identity, what country we belong to. In Germany, Jews had to wear a yellow star to be identified as Jewish. My mother, even though she didn't have to wear this star because she was married to a Gentile, in her passport, a big stamp, Jew. So we identify ourselves and each other by names and images and categories, which may be very factual. If you travel, you need to, the way we are organized at this time in history, at least traveling from the continent, from America to Europe, you have to have a passport which identifies where you come from. Nice thing right now in Europe is you can travel to different countries and you don't have to have that identification with you. They don't check your passport anymore. So there's some change there, but most places you have to be identified by your country of origin, and depending on that you may be searched longer than others. Try these days in trying to find a passport checking hole in the wide choice. I try to look for those where a person doesn't look like a Middle Easterner, because it takes much longer. You wait for a long time behind a person like that. This is not prejudice, but practicality. I like to get out of the airport. What was the third one? I think two of them that are listed as different: consider or treat another the same as oneself. No, it's good to use that separately. Treat or consider another thing or another person the same as oneself, because this is the identification that we talk about when we just use that word identification. Treat my country, treat my religion, my racial group, my ethnic group, as though it was myself. And the test for whether this is what is happening, a person could say, I don't do that. I'm beyond that. But what to watch for is when your country, your group, your ideology, your opinions with which you're identified, or I'm identified, so let's say we, don't want to set myself in any way apart. If something or someone we're identified with is attacked by someone else, slighted, or made fun of, put down, not respected, then something is mobilized in this body. Defensiveness or aggressiveness, hurt, insult. A very automatic reactiveness to avenge, to say, well, you are just not any better than this, you're also, or you're worse. This kind of identification with someone, a group, an idea, a profession, a religion, identified as though it was oneself, so that all the ingrained genetic impulses to survive as an individual or a member of the group are mobilized when that group is attacked just verbally. It doesn't have to be physically. Is that a pretty clear definition? It operates in all of us. We have been raised this way for millennia, to identify not just with our name, we're identified with that. And if somebody misspells my name, I may already feel a little irritated. Or pokes fun at my name, pokes fun at my family, my father or mother, I may feel hurt and irritated. As though it was a direct hurt of this body. The idea is, this is me. There's a connection made mentally and physically between me and my objects and people and groups of identification. A close physical connection is made, travels neurologically, electrochemically, tested out, and most people, of course, are aware of it. We've talked and written about it for years and years, and others have. To watch this amazing process of identification, how it triggers the survival instincts genetically programmed into each organism to defend and even die for what one is identified with, as though it was oneself. It has a function, survival function, in groups, and animals give evidence of it. I don't think they are identified symbolically or by image, but to protect the young. The mother protects the young as though it was her own body. Put herself between the young and the attacker, at the risk of being killed. So there are instances where animals will do that. But I don't believe these deer who are flocking together under the bird feeder feel identified with each other symbolically by idea. They just feed together because this is their way, their habitual, ingrained way to feed together. It may be more protective than one alone, can be gotten easier by the predator. And they walk or run together. And it may be possible to be together, we're asking this, without asking for ideal situations, just asking a question. It's permissible. Whether it's possible to be together, eat together, live together, have a good time together, and go through hard times together without forming these symbolic identifications, and live in the symbolic identification and what they trigger in the body, rather than in the immediacy of our relationship, without symbols. If that was possible for human beings, the world would look different. I'm not saying it is possible, or just because it may be possible for a case here and a case there may not mean it's possible for everyone. But I'm not interested in mass revolution, mass change. But is it possible for me to be with people, enjoy each other's company, work together, and not put some kind of an identifying label on it, which then begins to become more important than the relationship itself? The attachment to the symbol about my religion, my ideology, my ethnic group, my flag. The flag symbolizes identification. And even churches have flags. So the same question, is it possible to be in this country, become an American citizen? It was the practical thing to do for me. And not become identified with a flag, with a pledge of allegiance, with all this patriotism that is bouncing around in this country. Partly it's good business to identify things. It's amazing how much the flag is identified with products, and maybe the products sell better if they're American. Same in going to Germany. I've been asked this recently. Do you feel it's easier for you to be with Germans than with other people when you give retreat? Person didn't say, are you identified with Germans? I'm not. For one thing, the Germans today are so different from the ones I grew up with, particularly the ones I meet in retreat are just like people that get together here. There's no difference. It's people who are looking to learn, to find out, to wonder, to listen. Meditate together, sit quietly, wondering, inquiring. I find no national differences in that. So there is no basis even for identification. But having gone through the horrors of identification once in a very impressionable age of my life, and seen what it does, the suffering and pain and division and destruction it entailed, I don't think I'll ever be caught in it again. That is finished. Even though some ingrained responses may arise. I think I mentioned it once in a talk, hearing hearing in a little church in Switzerland, in a very exquisite chamber quartet, play the Emperor Quartet, the second movement of which is the German national anthem. I'd never heard it, I think, since leaving Germany. And when that was played, something was aroused in this body. Not the ones that the Nazis invented and put on top of that. Both, we had two national anthems, the old-fashioned one and a new one. The new one would have aroused quite different sensations, but this one is beautiful music in the first place, and has romantic words about Germany that I heard at an impressionable age. I was amazed. Without anything going on mentally, the body responded with sort of waving emotions of some sort. And then it was a very interesting exercise, if you will, to see if it was possible to listen to this exquisite music without the memory of what it had signified in the past. It wasn't easy, but it was not impossible. It worked after a while, just to hear this freshly, which is the essence of pure attention. It's pure attention. Essence is too much. So, by that I'm saying no one is free of one's ingrained traces and storage of memory. But it can be seen as such, and if it is given a careful attention, it may not dominate the scene. It may go into abeyance with this attention to what is actually taking place this moment. Because the identification with country, religion, family fills our dramas. Romeo and Julia, the fighting and killing each other, two families in a feud. It seems to be almost part of our nature, which gives energy. Be identified with a group is energizing. At the same time, it is lethal, destructive of the other group. It's been going on, who knows, in prehistory maybe. Tribes probably already knew who they were and who the others were. Were they always destroying each other? Was there enough room and habitat? Who knows? But today, when we're growing together by leap and bound, it's almost no space between each other anymore, and yet more and more and more identities, national identities, are growing up and wanting to be recognized and fighting the others. It's a very, very necessary or important question to ask oneself as an ordinary human being in all of that happening, whether it's possible to be with each other and to do what we need to do or love to do without any kind of exclusiveness and inclusiveness. One person once told me, he said, of course, I will always live where Jews live. I won't live where black people or African Americans live, and they won't live where we live. What's so bad about it? There's nothing bad about it. One can live where one wants to live, but one can question it a little bit. Do I know the others at all? Or just have opinions and stereotyped ideas? And even if I live here, Do I feel hostility or superiority or inferiority toward the others? That can be looked at, and in the looking, it can filter out. Remain in the filter, and what comes through is the pure liquid of attention, without prejudice, even though I may find myself living among Germans or Jews, or being African American among people who look like me and talk like me. But it's clearly helpful for all of us to be in touch with as many different of us than possible, to drop the images which are automatically manufactured in the brain as an image-making machine. Computer, maybe a more contemporary word. And if I'm not in direct touch with someone, the brain supplies the image for that person, for that group, for that country. And only if I go there directly now, in direct contact with the people, is there a possibility for discarding the image and getting to know the people directly. But I may not. I may still see them through images. That's what somebody mentioned to me. I've realized in my relationship with my former girlfriend, I was only related to images of her. And I was projecting images of being nice and helpful and sensitive. I wasn't. I only realized after coming back from retreat. I wasn't at all what I thought and projected I was, and she wasn't what I had projected and seen in her. So even when we're together close, we live together, do we see each other? Do we know each other? Or is it impossible to know each other because we're so different from one moment to the other, not to be captured in word or image for any length of time? I don't remember now in what connection I used identification yesterday, and the person who brought it up didn't remember it either, but it brought up this other thing. So we'll go on to this feeling and suffering with others. It became a serious question for the participants in the group, some of them. Why do we so thoroughly suffer with each other? And one person said, I don't want to suffer with others. I can see their pain, but I don't want to suffer with them. So, is that a good question to ask? Whether we can sensitively, openly, without filtering it, see the pain and suffering of someone else, but not get so involved in it that we suffer ourselves and are crushed by it, incapacitated by it. Because it's what happens often. Get sick thinking of sick people. Or dying people, or people war-torn, famine-ridden. So that's a question for each one of us to put to ourselves. Because we don't want to, maybe we do, don't want to speak for others, but so put it as a question, do we want to become indifferent and callous so we're not touched by the pain of others? We do want to be sensitive. And sensitivity is always all or none. It's not, okay, I want to be sensitive in this regard, but I don't want to be sensitive in that respect. That's too painful. Sensitivity is sensitivity to everything. So, is it possible to feel, see, understand people's pain. Other people's pain I'm taking right now, oneself isn't in pain. And not be crushed by it, yet very sensitive to it, and alert to it, aware of it. I think it does have a chance of happening when there is this wholesome attention in which the I, the me, is not at the center, identifying with it and being there with its emotions and also its fears. Very often this suffering with others is a fear. I may have to suffer like that too, and horrors. It would be terrible. That is mixed into this suffering at the thought of other people's pain or agonies. Is there? Is there fear? Having to go through that oneself? It's not complete attention. There are all kinds of circuits in motion which don't need to be in motion when we really face and listen to and are attentive to what is happening in ourselves and each other. I think it's inevitable in this work of sitting quietly for long periods of time. We're going to have 2 10-day retreats later on this year. People have requested it. It happens this way as one touches and does not recoil from personal pain and hurt and sort of sees through it. It abates. Then there may be touching this ocean of human pain and suffering everywhere since time immemorial. And I'm not now saying that human beings have only been in pain. Sometimes people say it's terrible to listen to you. Only talk about pain. Talk about something nice. I don't have to talk about it. The sun is shining. Those plants up there are all lit up in a green you never see unless the sun shines right on it. The good things, the beautiful things take care of themselves. They usually don't cause too many problems except wanting to hold on to it, not let go of it. But it's the other problems of pain and suffering that are our obstacles, our solitary confinement. So, this is what I was saying. It's almost inevitable in this quiet work of listening, of inquiring, or just sitting without knowing, that there is contact with the ocean of suffering of human beings. It's been around for so long, it's so extensive. And to look at it, not to recoil, not to rationalize it. Well, that's human nature. We have to put up with it. Not to know it. Not to recoil, not to resist, and not to be crushed in this strength that comes with attention and awareness. A gentle strength. Please, if this is unclear or more needs to be said, we're just starting the second day and there are lots of individual and group meetings to go into this. Let's talk a bit about suffering, since we've been on this topic, because I do differentiate in the language I use at the moment, maybe different next time. I do differentiate between having a pain in the back or knee or suffering from a pain in the back or knee. Now, I'm not saying the use of the language is correct. I'm just explaining right now how I'm using it. A pain here or here is something quite factual. Although one will notice that the less fear there is or the less resistance there is, something changes in the pain too. It's an amazing discovery. It doesn't remain the same when resistance is seen and drops off, or fear of it is seen and does not, complicate it or add to it. Suffering, the word can be used for making a story out of my pain, my fate, my difficulties, weaving it into a story which triggers responses in this organism of self-pity, agony, despair, anger, resentment, revenge. And it's amazing to experiment with this, just the way the brain or thought puts it, just the language it is used to describe to myself what is happening to me. The body responds accordingly. Just like we do with newspapers. If the language is loaded, we may respond with vehemence, with anger, with resentment, or hatred. If the language is factual, we may not respond this way. So we may see it in newspapers, but we often don't see it in ourselves. We are not fine-tuned or wiretapped into the tapes that are running. And it's possible to do that if we become interested. Somebody talks about it and we become interested, and then we notice it. Yeah, I just described this in vehement terms to myself and aroused a lot of anger against her or him. What he did to me, what she didn't do to me. I once wrote about this in a newsletter article, and I'll mention it again. I mentioned it in the group, so please forgive me for having to hear it twice, but I think it's very much to the point. Coming down into the kitchen for breakfast, and Kyle, who was at the time on a special diet, had prepared his own breakfast. And I had expected to find breakfast made for myself. He usually does it, but he hadn't. And seeing no food for me, a story or a headline began to emerge. No one ever does anything for me. That's a powerful one, isn't it? For all of us. But for some reason, it was seen. It was seen emerging, and you can see actually how you're about to react. All systems are go to become abusive, to blame a person and to try to elicit self-pity and to feel so sorry for oneself. At the sound, the internal sound of those words. And seeing that, I didn't have to say it, and the body didn't have to react, and we could be happily related. I made my own maypole. Took a half a minute. Now somebody, I don't remember who it was, somebody said, it's an interesting thing what you wrote there, and you ought to look at it a little bit more. Maybe it's true. Maybe you were saying something true that your people don't do for you, and that you should be a little bit more assertive or so. I don't know what to do with that. That's something else. Look at that when that comes up. At that moment it was clear that something was about to explode and didn't, because there was an intelligent looking, and I don't mean my IQ, but intelligence operating, which isn't owned by anyone. It's available, it's in the air. So the lack of a breakfast didn't become a suffering morning or a suffering moment. The suffering would have happened if I had thought more about this and thought how, well, I don't have to spell it out that much. So same with anything that happens to us. Watch it. How do you talk to yourself, or maybe to your best friend? And usually our best friends we consider those who listen to us and agree with us, augment our story, support us. They are our support friends. So let's listen in to what we say about ourselves and each other and question the accuracy. Not say straight away it's inaccurate. Let's question it and look at it. Is it really true? As far as we know, maybe the answer has to be, I don't know whether it's true or not, but I've already thought I knew it was true, so I'll take that back. I don't know. Some people seem to make suffering the content of their lives. I've lived with people like that. It can become a content. Everything the mind turns into suffering. It's a habit. It can be a traditional habit, passed on from generation to generation. One can take pride in one's suffering, because that's my identity. I'm a sufferer, a martyr. How can we shake ourselves loose from that? Because that's not being alive. It's living out a story and passing it on to the second and third and fourth generation. Be aware of it. Become aware of it. Let the sunlight irradiate the whole story, the whole ongoing process. And what will remain of it if the sunlight gets through, shows it up? Maybe then we realize the falseness of it, the unnecessariness of it for that moment. But it's the first step. It's not easy to become aware, because our habits are so taken for granted. But it's not impossible. And we won't talk about effort today, but maybe tomorrow. Is it an effort to become aware? Is it an effort to listen and to look? And I'd also like to hear from each other. What is the effort? Because today, I don't feel it's an effort. Maybe I've forgotten how effort-ridden it was at one time to pay attention. We will end here for today.